The questions that unsettle people most are usually the ones that hide just beneath the surface of the world they think they already understand. What if the Europe we see on maps is only the upper shell of something far older, far larger, and far more complex? What if an entire hidden world has been sitting beneath our feet in a scale that challenges what we thought we knew about human history? For years, archaeologists believed they had a fairly coherent timeline for how Europe was shaped. Yet every few seasons, new findings quietly contradict pieces of that story. Recent geological scans are showing networks of tunnels, chambers, and collapsed structures stretching for distances that are difficult to explain with conventional models. The numbers are staggering. Some of these underground patterns span areas comparable in size to small modern countries. It is natural to ask whether these are isolated anomalies or clues to a deeper chapter of civilization. These questions matter because they challenge our assumptions about how societies evolve. They invite a reconsideration of the scale at which ancient people worked, traveled, and survived. They raise the unsettling possibility that entire regions of Europe may carry layers of human activity far older than anything written in early chronicles. Why do these networks exist, and what kind of intelligence or necessity produced them? Recent reports from European geological institutes describe unexpected voids beneath regions known for their dense bedrock. Archaeologists express careful excitement, not because they can confirm anything, but because the data do not behave like natural formations. That contrast between expectation and observation creates the tension that drives this investigation. Something has shaped the ground itself, and the results do not fit easily into standard narratives. These opening questions are not meant to offer conclusions. They are meant to reflect a growing scientific curiosity, one supported by new surveys, expanded excavations, and unexplained underground patterns emerging across the continent. The scale of these discoveries points toward a story still waiting to be assembled. The early clues suggest several threads that will need to be traced with patience. The newly mapped cavities appear in regions that were once considered archaeologically quiet, which means long-held assumptions about settlement patterns may need rethinking. Some of these underground features intersect with ancient trade corridors. Others lie far from any known cultural centers. Each configuration hints at a different kind of activity, and none of them can yet be fully explained. As the evidence expands, researchers are beginning to compare these formations with other global cases where ancient societies manipulated the subsurface for reasons ranging from shelter to ritual practice to large-scale resource management. Europe's underground anomalies may not follow a single narrative. Instead, they may represent several phases of human adaptation layered over one another. That possibility widens the scope of inquiry and raises questions that reach far beyond a single civilization or era. Further sections will explore the mechanical principles that could produce such structures, the physical clues recorded by modern surveys, the ways alternative explanations challenge or support the emerging picture, and the large gaps that still separate observation from interpretation. The aim is not to race toward a dramatic conclusion, but to understand the quiet patterns forming beneath the continent. Each layer, each cavity, and each unexplained tunnel becomes a small window into a past more intricate than it first appears. Many of the underground formations now appearing in European surveys can be understood more clearly when compared to patterns familiar from everyday life. A city's subway system, for instance, grows gradually as new lines are added to meet different needs. Over time, old sections decay, new ones are reinforced, and unused corridors become silent spaces no one remembers building. The subsurface of a continent can evolve in a surprisingly similar way. Human activity, natural forces, and shifting geology can all leave behind overlapping traces, each shaped by different intentions and different constraints. The mechanism behind these preserved voids begins with something simple. When early societies needed stability, they turned to stone and earth, carving into the ground because it offered cool temperatures, acoustic isolation, and natural protection. In technical terms, these are anthropogenic cavities produced through repeated excavation. They differ sharply from natural karst formations, which are dissolved by circulating water over thousands of years. Anthropogenic voids tend to have smoother planes, directional cuts, and debris signatures that follow mechanical patterns rather than random erosion. Some of the larger networks may reflect a second mechanism. In periods of environmental stress, communities often expanded existing chambers rather than build above ground. Archaeologists call this adaptive enlargement, a process where functional needs accumulate over generations. These expansions tend to leave stepped floors, widen support points, and redistribution scars where weight was shifted to prevent collapse. Such indicators can survive even when the original cultural layer disappears. A third mechanism emerges from modern geophysical imaging. Ground-penetrating radar, magnetometry, and seismic tomography generate point clouds that reveal density differences under the surface. When those differences form linear, grid-like, or branching geometries, researchers often suspect intentional design. Natural faults rarely create long, parallel paths. Natural caves do not typically intersect at consistent angles. Patterns like these encourage debate, because they leave room for multiple interpretations while resisting easy dismissal. These mechanisms open the door to discussions that spark lively comments in academic circles and public forums alike. Could some of these structures reflect forgotten engineering traditions? Could they represent ritual landscapes that extended beneath settlements? Or are they simply misread geological accidents that resemble human planning? The uncertainty gives each hypothesis momentum, and the diversity of potential explanations keeps the topic both scientific and culturally charged. Understanding these processes requires blending intuitive comparisons with precise definitions. When viewed together, the mechanisms form a toolkit that helps translate faint underground shapes into possible human behaviors. They also highlight how much remains unclassified. The ground beneath Europe carries signals from different eras, each shaped by mechanical choices that still echo through modern imaging technologies. Several lines of evidence are beginning to draw researchers toward a more structured understanding of what lies beneath Europe. One of the clearest indicators comes from radar-based density maps showing long, continuous corridors extending for hundreds of meters. These paths maintain a near-constant height and width, a feature rarely produced by natural erosion. The geometric consistency suggests repeated human intervention, or at the very least, an intentional modification that altered the original landscape. Another observation comes from sediment cores taken above some of these anomalies. The layers contain charcoal fragments and microdebris patterns resembling those found in ancient mining zones. The distribution of these traces implies controlled fire usage, ventilation methods, or repeated occupancy cycles. Natural cave systems usually show diffuse soot deposition, but here the soot appears concentrated, pointing to localized human activity rather than random burning events. A third fact arises from recent excavations in Central and Eastern Europe, where isolated chambers have been opened after decades of speculation. Inside some of these spaces, archaeologists found tool marks following a consistent directional rhythm. The marks match stoneworking techniques identified in early European cultures, though the depth and alignment differ in notable ways. This mix of familiarity and anomaly fuels debates about whether these chambers reflect known societies or something earlier and less documented. A fourth indicator involves acoustic readings taken in deep cavities. Sound behaves differently in natural voids compared to engineered spaces. In the newly surveyed sites, reverberation is oddly stable, with frequencies bouncing in a way typical of flattened surfaces and reinforced walls. This type of acoustic behavior is not definitive proof of construction, but it strongly hints at deliberate shaping. Researchers rely on these readings to judge how sound waves travel, revealing subtle structural choices no longer visible to the eye. A fifth observation centers around collapsed entrances. Some appear intentionally sealed rather than the result of gradual geological failure. The material is layered in a way that resembles defensive closure or long-term abandonment. That kind of deliberate sealing has been documented in other ancient contexts worldwide, often marking places designed to be hidden, protected, or forgotten. Each of these facts contributes a small, distinct signal. None of them alone can define the true nature of the underground networks. Yet together they create a pattern that resists simple geological explanations. It is the accumulation of these observations, rather than a single spectacular find, that encourages a deeper investigation into the unseen structures beneath the continent. Any investigation of large underground structures must contend with the possibility that the patterns being observed are not cultural at all. Natural processes can generate shapes that, from a distance, resemble intentional design. Water interacting with limestone can carve elongated passages. Slow tectonic pressures can fracture rock into repeating angles. Even subtle shifts in temperature and moisture can hollow spaces that look engineered. Before any strong claim is made, researchers have to test whether the emerging picture can be explained fully by geology alone. One proposed alternative model argues that many of the newly identified voids are simply extensions of deep karst systems. In this view, the linear paths appearing on radar are not tunnels but segments of collapsed channels connected by coincidence. The model works well in regions where limestone dominates the bedrock, but it becomes less convincing in areas composed mostly of granite or volcanic rock, where karst processes struggle to produce such long, consistent shapes. The distribution of these formations across multiple geological zones complicates the idea of a single natural cause. A different explanation suggests that ancient mining operations, rather than forgotten civilizations, created the patterns. Europe has a long history of subsurface extraction, and some early mines were far more complex than once believed. This model fits well with the presence of charcoal fragments and microdebris. However, it does not fully account for the extended, branching corridors that show no trace of or deposits or resource-driven layout. Mines tend to follow veins or pockets of material. The newly mapped structures often ignore those boundaries, curving and intersecting in ways that do not match resource exploitation. A third hypothesis treats the voids as geological artifacts amplified by modern imaging. Ground-penetrating radar can produce misleading results when moisture, soil composition, and buried debris interact unpredictably. Some skeptics believe the linear features might reflect acoustic noise or layering effects. Yet repeated scans using different technologies, magnetometry, seismic tomography, and electrical resistivity, produce overlapping geometries. If the signals were random distortions, they would not align across independent measurement methods. Some researchers prefer a null hypothesis, that the patterns represent multiple unrelated processes stacked over centuries. In this interpretation, natural cavities, abandoned mines, collapsed cellars, wartime structures, and ancient shelters overlap by chance. This patchwork explanation cannot be dismissed. European landscapes have been shaped by countless human and environmental events. But the null hypothesis becomes strained when confronted with the sheer scale of continuity across regions that never shared cultural or industrial histories. Each of these alternative models reveals strengths and weaknesses. None of them fully answer the central questions raised by the data. Yet they provide the critical balance needed to avoid premature conclusions. By examining the limits of these competing explanations, researchers gain clarity about where evidence is solid, where it is ambiguous, and where it demands a deeper, more disciplined investigation. Large sections of the underground landscape remain only partially understood, and those gaps shape the limits of every interpretation. Modern imaging detects density changes, but cannot always distinguish between natural cavities, human-made chambers, or hybrid formations where geological and cultural processes overlap. Without direct excavation, many of the shapes remain mathematical silhouettes rather than physical spaces. That distance between scan and site creates one of the largest uncertainties in current research. Chronology presents an equally difficult challenge. Dating underground structures requires organic material, tool residues, or identifiable cultural layers, yet many of the newly detected voids contain none of these. Sediment often filters down over centuries, erasing fine-grained traces of the people who might have worked there. In such environments, even a difference of a few centimeters in soil accumulation can represent the loss of an entire historical context. Without reliable timelines, the scale of human involvement remains an open question. Another uncertainty arises from the possibility of missing entrance points. Some underground systems seem to have no accessible openings today. These could have collapsed naturally, been sealed intentionally, or simply lie beneath modern cities where excavation is impossible. The absence of entrances restricts exploration and leaves researchers guessing about the structure's original purpose. Was it ceremonial, defensive, residential, or utilitarian? Each interpretation leaves different clues, but without physical access, none can be confirmed. Environmental distortion further complicates the picture. Geological pressure can deform old chambers. Water can reshape edges. Seismic events can fracture and reconfigure entire passages. Over long periods of time, these distortions can make precise identification nearly impossible. A structure that once carried human intention may look irregular today, while a natural cavity may appear deceptively engineered. This blending of signals makes it difficult to establish clear boundaries between cultural design and natural evolution. A final and persistent gap concerns the absence of comparative frameworks. Europe's underground record is extensive but unevenly studied. Many regions lack comprehensive mapping. Others rely on outdated surveys created before modern imaging existed. Without a full continental dataset, researchers cannot yet determine whether the anomalies form coherent networks or isolated pockets. This uncertainty leaves room for both extraordinary and ordinary possibilities. These unknowns do not weaken the investigation. Instead, they highlight its complexity. Every unanswered question becomes a reminder that the subterranean landscape is still an active frontier of research, shaped by incomplete data, limited access, and the passage of vast spans of time. The gaps serve as markers of how much remains to be discovered, and how much care is needed before drawing conclusions about the hidden structures beneath Europe. The earliest questions revolved around whether Europe's underground patterns were the work of purposeful hands or the slow mathematics of geology. With the evidence now arranged, the answers take shape through cautious steps rather than bold proclamations. The radar signatures, tool-like markings, structured acoustics, and sealed entrances do not behave like the output of one accidental process. Instead, they point to repeated human interaction with the subsurface, carried out at different times by different groups and for different reasons. The long, straight corridors visible in multiple surveys are unlikely to have formed through ordinary karst erosion alone. Natural channels rarely maintain such consistent height and width for such long distances. The continuity observed across varied geological zones makes a single natural explanation improbable. Instead, the evidence suggests phases of excavation, enlargement, or repurposing. It does not imply a forgotten supercivilization, but it does indicate organized labor, deliberate planning, and long-term usage in ways that challenge the simplicity of current historical models. The charcoal deposits and microsediment debris align more closely with human-controlled fire usage than with random burning inside natural caves. This pattern is consistent with ventilation attempts, work cycles, or repeated occupancy. Combined with directional tool patterns inside isolated chambers, the picture that emerges is not one of chance but of intention. Something about these spaces mattered enough for people to carve, maintain, or seal them over centuries. Many of the alternative models tested earlier prove useful, but none fully explain the full spectrum of observations. Pure geology cannot account for the geometric regularity visible in scans. Mining activity explains fragments of the story, yet fails to match the scale and layout of the extended networks. Layered historical processes likely played a role, but the recurring signatures across so many regions suggest more than an accidental stacking of unrelated events. The explanation that fits best is a composite one, a series of human interventions layered over time onto an already complex natural landscape. The data does not support sweeping claims of a vast, unified underground culture. Instead, it points towards something quieter yet equally striking. Europe's subsurface appears to reflect a long tradition of shaping the earth for shelter, ritual, protection, or resource needs, carried out across eras we still struggle to date. The networks are not random, but their purposes may have shifted over generations. The hidden underworld is not mythical. It is the accumulated memory of countless communities who turn to the ground beneath them for stability, safety, and meaning. These answers do not close the investigation. They simply anchor the earliest questions in a foundation supported by observable patterns. The emerging conclusion is that Europe's underground world is both larger and more intricate than previously believed. It is neither a grand conspiracy nor a geological illusion, but a layered record of human adaptation that waited centuries to be recognized. Beneath every landscape there is an archive, and Europe's underground world is no exception. What rises from the evidence is not a story of lost empires or buried legends, but of people responding to the conditions of their time with patience, intention, and quiet engineering. The tunnels, sealed chambers, and forgotten cavities reflect choices made in eras when survival, belief, and community demanded more than what the surface alone could offer. They show how societies learned to carve stability out of uncertainty, and how that instinct left behind an imprint larger than anyone expected. The deeper meaning of these findings lies in what they reveal about human continuity. Across centuries and cultures, people returned to the earth not only for resources but for structure, safety, and ritual. The underground became a shelter from conflict, a canvas for early engineering, and a place where knowledge could be preserved when the world above was unstable. The persistence of these patterns suggests that the instinct to shape hidden spaces is as old as civilization itself. It reminds us that the physical world we see is only a fraction of the environments humans have built, occupied, and abandoned. At a personal level, there is something quietly humbling about recognizing how much remains unseen in familiar places. Modern cities stand over layers of history that still resist complete understanding. The idea that entire systems of chambers exist beneath ordinary ground invites reflection about how little of the human story is fully mapped. The gaps in knowledge are not failures. They are invitations. They encourage curiosity, discipline, and the awareness that discovery is an ongoing process rather than a final destination. In the end, the hidden underworld of Europe illustrates how fragile human memory can be, and how resilient human effort is when preserved in stone and soil. Each chamber and corridor is a reminder that even the most enduring structures can vanish from collective awareness, waiting to be rediscovered by those willing to look deeper. The significance of these spaces does not come from mythology, but from their quiet testimony to the lives that shaped them. That testimony remains incomplete, but it is enough to show that the past is always larger than the stories we tell about it. Thank you for listening to this exploration of Europe's underground world. If this journey through the unseen layers of the continent sparked your curiosity, consider subscribing to the channel. Your interest and support help bring more investigative documentaries to life.